the yoga of essential and comprehensive knowledge. We will follow up with the prayer Asato ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityor ma Amritam Gamaya. Take me from darkness to light, from falsehood to truth, darkness to light, and from death and destruction to immortality. Those of you who are familiar with that can join us. We will sing it 5 times at the end.
मोहितं नाभिजानाति मामेभ्यः परमव्ययम्। दैवी ह्येषा गुणमयी मम माया दुरत्यया मामेव ये प्रपद्यन्ते मायामेतां तरन्ति ते न मां दुष्कृतिनो मूढा प्रपद्यन्ते नराधमा माययापहृतज्ञाना आसुरं भावमाश्रिता चतुर्विधा भजन्ते मां जनाः सुकृतिनोऽर्जुन आर्तो जिज्ञासुरर्थार्थी ज्ञानी च भरतर्षभ तेषां ज्ञानी नित्ययुक्त एकभक्तिर्विशिष्यते प्रियो हि ज्ञानिनोत्यर्थम् अहं स च मम प्रियः उदाराः सर्व एवैते ज्ञानी त्वामैव मे मतम् आस्थितः स हि युक्तात्मा मामेवानुत्तमां गतिम् बहूनां जन्मनामन्ते ज्ञानवान् मां प्रपद्यते वासुदेवः सर्वमिति स महात्मा सुदुर्लभः कामैस्तैस्तैर्हृतज्ञाना प्रपद्यन्ते न्यदेवता तं तं नियममास्थाय प्रकृत्या नियता स्वया यो यो यां यां तनुं भक्तः श्रद्धयार्चितुमिच्छति तस्य तस्याचलां श्रद्धां तामेव विदधाम्यहम् स तया श्रद्धया युक्तः तस्याराधनमीहते लभते च ततः कामान् मयैव विहितान् हितान् अन्तवत्तु फलं तेषां तद्भवत्यल्पमेधसाम् देवान् देवयजो यान्ति मद्भक्ता यान्ति मामपि अव्यक्तं व्यक्तिमापन्नं मन्यन्ते मामबुद्धयः परं भावमजानन्तो ममाव्ययमनुत्तमम् नाहं प्रकाशः सर्वस्य योगमाया समावृतः मूढोऽयं नाभिजानाति लोको मामजमव्ययम् वेदाहं समतीतानि वर्तमानानि चार्जुन भविष्याणि च भूतानि मां तु वेद न कश्चन इच्छाद्वेषसमुत्थेन द्वन्द्वमोहेन भारत सर्वभूतानि सम्मोहं सर्गे यान्ति परन्तप येषां त्वन्तगतं पापं जनानां पुण्यकर्मणां ते द्वन्द्वमोहनिर्मुक्ता भजन्ते मां दृढव्रता जरामरणमोक्षाय मामाश्रित्य यतन्ति ये ते ब्रह्म तद्विदुः कृत्स्नम् अध्यात्मं कर्म चाखिलम् साधिभूतादिदैवं मां साधियज्ञं च ये विदुः प्रयाणकालेऽपि च मां ते विदुर्युक्तचेतसः ॐ तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासूपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे ज्ञानविज्ञानयोगो नाम सप्तमोऽध्यायः। ॐ श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय Satoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Satoma Sadgamaya Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
And this peace in your heart, in your prayers, may that radiate from this heart to the heart and the universe beyond. On occasion of 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, what a powerful rendition of chapter 7, Yoga, Bhagavad Gita, the yoga of essential and complete knowledge. Just exactly Sri Aurobindo paved it for us. Thank you so much. I'm now going to invite onto the stage our special lamas who have traveled all the way from Varanasi, Tibet. Lama Tinle, Lama Jikme, Kenpo Kingadrakpa, I'm really sorry, please apologies, and Kenpo Kunchong Norpo. So they would, in the Buddhistic chanting, for about 7 to 10 minutes. 7 to 10 minutes. Can I be a little bit hungry and ask for 7 to 10 minutes? Again, allow the vibrations to soak in. And if you feel called, feel free to chant along with them.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to invite, okay, one second. Should I invite first? I don't know the protocol. Okay, sorry. I was just checking with her. Can I invite the two of you onto the stage, but just give me a second to place the chairs. So just a second. Can I invite Sri Ravi, Madam Tamilsai, and Jayanti, and Dana. I'll just get one. Sorry for this. So on this occasion, sir, can I invite you both? And the context is that as a humankind, we are on the crossroads. And the crossroad is that of something needs to happen a lot more at the level of awakening the human consciousness so that all forms of life on the planet Earth thrives. Auroville is one such community that is committed to it. And the occasion and the context for this summit has been to invite delegates and speakers. We have about 30 people from different parts of the world come here. The next 3 days across different topics, we're going to be debating, conversing, presenting with the hope that this paves the way for the future. So thank you for coming here, and on this occasion, a few words from your end, which is really honor. Thank you. Honorable member, I'm really sorry. Honorable Lieutenant Governor of Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry. Ma'am, over to you.
Spiritual good morning to each and everyone here. And when I entered, in spite of the busy schedule, so much of turmoil inside the mind, but when I entered this room with chanting from our religious leaders, almost everything vanished. As our Sri Aurobindo says, when I went to the jail, it was burdened with, so loaded with so much of worries. But the Britishers thought that it's a punishment for me. But when I entered the jail, actually they have shown the spiritual world to me. So it is almost, when we read about Sri Aurobindo and the mothers, our aim, create this Auroville, and with the spirituality and the benefits of the spirituality. Everyone have to face challenges in their life. But how to face it? And in spite of facing it, how to calm down? How to make ourselves more productive? Actually, they say meditation, it is not only makes us calm, it not only calm our sensations, but it is more productive. Most of the people think that if we meditate, okay, we will be in a silent mode. And then we will be very silent, and it's a baseline feeling. But what medicine says, the meditation increases the concentration, and it makes us super productive also. So this message should be conveyed to the youngsters. They think only the elderly people or spiritual leaders or the people who have lost their life or who have in the far end of the life only have to meditate. But the youngsters at the younger age, in the earlier age, if they start using the spiritualism, and as our Sri Aurobindo says, as I was brought up in a Western culture, most in the London British atmosphere, and when I landed in our country, I was unable to feel the pride of our country, and I was unable to feel the nobility of my religion. But when I was imprisoned, the the spirit of Hinduism and the nobility of the Hinduism and the trueness of the Hinduism was taught to me through my internal feeling. So these type of, why I am here mentioning about Sri Aurobindo, because he was imprisoned. It was a blame on him which was not true. He was accused for which he was not the cause of it. But in spite of that, he took it in a correct spirit, and 1 year of his imprisonment refined him and made him as a spiritual leader and made him more strong. So this is the message we have to give to our youngsters. The challenges we face are there to make us more stronger. And medically also, because this chanting, as I already said, the most of the youngsters or most of the people, even the college students, think that chanting is not for us. But in Italy, not in India also, in Italy, they did a medical research on the Indian spiritual leaders who practices chanting every day. Say they did a MRI, high resolution MRI, and they found, they had a study of the control study comparatively comparing the spiritual leaders and the youngsters or the leaders or the people who are regularly practicing chanting and then the normal human beings. But they were very much astonished to find that the grasping power of the brain, because it is the new modern technique of MRI, high resolution MRI, the brain of the people who are continuously chanting is more effective, more thought provoking, and that the infused dyes, it was able to take it more than the other people who are not chanting. So scientifically it is proved meditation and chanting improves the capacity of the brain, improves the focus of the brain, improves the productivity of our brain as well as our physical activities. And time consuming, if a work is done for 10 to 20 minutes after chanting or meditation, we can do that work in 5 minutes. So it is time consuming. The consumption of the time also reduce. So in a limited time, we can achieve great things. So these all things to be conveyed to the youngsters. So when such things are scientifically proven, nowadays whenever we say they need, you are making me more spiritual, and becoming spiritual, they think that is not the normal life. This is the a part of the normal life, and yoga, the chanting and meditation makes us more productive, super productive, and makes us the achievers. So this should be conveyed, and this is the place. Puducherry, this, even though it is situated in Tamil Nadu, it's in the border, and Puducherry is known as Vedaburi. Vedaburi means it's the land of Vedas. Tamil Nadu, even though it is the Tamil speaking people are there, they are accepting that this is the name of the Puducherry. So we have more than 30 to 40 saints, mutts are here. Comparative to other states, we have more than 30 to 40 mutts are here. And Siddhars, Siddhar Bidangal we say. And so only Mother and Sri Aurobindo, when they landed in Puducherry, they not only they became the spiritual leaders, but they wanted this spread the aura of spiritualism among the human beings, because their life should be more productive, more safe, more secured, and it should be more reasonable. So this program, I really appreciate Madam Ravi for organizing this program, and all the Aurobindo members, and I respect our Honorable Tamil Nadu Governor and our Chairman for attending this program. And I thought, because this program, how it is going to be, but when I entered itself, it gave me so much of peace. So that it's a very reasonable and very the need of the hour, and these type of spiritual message should be spread across the state and the nation, and particularly the youngsters. Because that is the message from our Sri Aurobindo and from our Annai, that whatever may be the way of life we lead, it should be useful to the humanitarians. It should be humane. Thank you so much.
I humbly apologize. I introduced her as the Honorable Governor of Tamil Nadu. She's our Honorable. I know, but this takes. Thank you so much for that understanding, but really, sincerely, apologies to the crowd here for the foxpaws. I now invite Sri and Ravi, and let me get this right, Honorable Governor of Tamil Nadu and the Chairman of Aurobindo Foundation, to say a few words.
Honorable Tamil Saiji, Governor Telangana, Lieutenant Governor Puducherry, our dear Dena Mariam, spiritual leaders and seekers. My humble pranam to all of you. I stand before you not as a governor, but as a simple sadhak who feels blessed in the presence of his spiritual leaders and the seekers around. We are all on a journey to higher awakening. This 3 days conclave of the leaders, the spiritual leaders and seekers, I thank Dena Mariam for organizing it, bringing the people around, and at a place which is more appropriate than perhaps any other place, Aurobindo. On the occasion of 150th birth anniversary, when we are celebrating the year long, and during this time, on this day, this assembly of spiritual leaders and seekers at Aurobindo, it means a lot. The theme chosen very aptly is science, spirituality, and human awakening. Today we know that the world is in crisis. Humanity is in crisis. We are, each one of us, are in conflict with ourselves, with the people around, the community, and conflict with the environment. And this spiraling conflict is taking a heavy toll. We see the wars, visible wars, invisible wars, waging all across the world in different forms. We see the climate crisis. We see how Mother Earth is stressed, is in pain. We see how the glaciers are melting, polar ice caps are receding, forests are shrinking, rivers are drying up. The areas which used to be known for a very, very long time as cold places are experiencing heat waves. And the place which used to be for centuries rain deficient, experiencing flood, devastating flood. Fury of elements, we are all witness to it. We have not even fully come out of the global pandemic. When it touched each and every one, whole world was affected. We all thought that this pandemic would give a lesson, and then perhaps the people would move towards something higher. They would be more compassionate in dealing with the problem, the suffering of the others. It didn't happen. We found that the response to global pandemic, especially by the advanced developed countries which had developed the medicines and vaccines and all, how it was unsatisfactory, because many of them looked upon it as a mercantile opportunity to make money. So where is the humanity? All around we see things not very bright, not very beautiful. Now at this point of time, the question that has agitated Sri Aurobindo and which perhaps stimulated him to go for the deeper meditation and studies, and at the end of it, he gave us the light. He showed us the light. The human awakening. It is a dynamic process. We are all in the process of evolution. Evolution of consciousness, going to the higher level. Now, this, where is it placed vis-a-vis the science? Because one challenge that a spirituality and a spiritual journey faces quite often is from the world of science. Science, as we understand and as we are talking about, is something about physical science, science of matter. The conflict that started, because many a times when we talk about spirituality, we talk about the various facets of spirituality. Often arguments are placed. It is, how do you test it in the laboratory of science? Is it valid? Is it rational? Is it reasonable? They try to put to the test of reason. Let us not forget that this logic, this modern science that originated and developed in Europe, the modern science, as I'm talking about. It was also a period of enlightenment. Enlightenment is what is called the age of reason, when we had a whole lot of European philosophers, from Thomas Paine to Locke to Hume and all others, so many, giving sovereignty to reason. The reason, whatever doesn't stand to reason, is not to be accepted. This happened at a time when there was a conflict between the church and the state. And in that conflict, a lot of literature was created, which gave a pushback to the church. The logic of faith, the logic of reason and logic of faith. Faith was pushed back, and this was to carve out. It had a political context. So when we talk about science as it stands, that everything has to be tested in a laboratory of science, that doesn't hold necessarily valid when it comes to spirituality, because the grammar and vocabulary of science and the grammar and vocabulary of spirituality are not exactly alike. We are all people. We have physical, we have intellectual, we have spiritual. We are matter, we are mind, we are spirit. Now the spirit is the most subtle, and at that level we see the universal oneness. The universal oneness that Sri Aurobindo talked about, and which our Vedas, since then all the literature have talked about. People, selected individuals have evolved through their individual meditation, revolutionary process through which they reached that level, and they could, with a sahaj gyan, without any intellectual exercise, they could see the unity of entire creation. But once you see that oneness, differences dissolve, because there is no conflict. We are all one, member of a family. After all, it is the same Mother Earth that has given birth to us, sustained us, which has given birth to animals, which has given birth to plant. We are all children of the same mother. If that sense comes in the natural process, without any effort of logic and reason, that is the stage of awakening, the higher level of awakening, or perhaps the final stage of awakening. We are all in the pursuit of that. Now here at this point of time, Sri Aurobindo had also mentioned about one of the dreams when he mentioned that it is the duty of Bharat, this country, to share the spirituality here as a gift to the rest of the world. Now, when here our spirituality talks about oneness of the entire creation, this message to disseminate in the rest of the world, we need to demonstrate from here at this very place, and then to radiate the message to the rest of the world. Now, how do we do that? I'm very sure in the next 3 days that very eminent people who are scholars, intellectual as well as spiritual achievers, they should be able to throw light. And we should be able to have some takeaway from these 3 days, so that we hear the Aurobindo benefits, because this place itself needs a lot of healing, it needs the way forward. We need to go forward to demonstrate to the world. When we talk about spreading the message of universal unity, universal oneness, or we talk about human unity, essentially it is the unity of creation. It's not human unity, it's just one step. It is the unity of the entire creation. For that to happen, we can make a beginning from this place, Auroville. And for that, we need to have our sense of, I won't call it our own, because what is our own after all? It is a place of experiment where we collectively are trying to evolve, and thereby demonstrate. It is like a demonstrative when we are in the farming. In agriculture, we have a demonstration farm which is shown to the world, shown to others to see how we can do the good harvest, how we can produce more. Here is a demonstration laboratory, a community, where we need to demonstrate to the world that look, people coming from different parts of the world, various backgrounds, languages, so-called races, religion, creed, geography. We can all live together for a common purpose, live together not as a matter of coerced living, but voluntary living, sharing together with each other that spirit of oneness, and thereby reflect and radiate that spirit of oneness. I am very sure that this 3 days conclave will come up with some guidelines, some roadmap it will show. It will show some light. How do we go about it? I wish this the very best. All like my prayers, my wish, and my dedication to the cause. At the end of it, we will all benefit. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that note. And on that note, I'm going to invite Dana Miriam, member of the International Advisory Council, and amidst all the other activities, I'm going to call on you because I think Sri Ravi set the tone, and that was also the idea and inspiration for you to bring together this August gathering. And a vote of thanks for them for having truly come here and spent the time to take forward what I think is the hope in every heart.
This one? I'm grateful for both of the governors, for our Secretary Gianti for making this all possible, and for all of the volunteers, for Suda and all the volunteers that have worked on this to make it possible. Every time we bring people together from around the world, it's a huge effort. And everybody is so busy today that it's hard to find the time to come. And I'm extremely grateful for everyone who's come from so far away and from even within Oroville. Everybody's so busy to take time out to spend a few days together. It's very precious. And I think after being isolated for these few years during COVID, it's even more important for us to come together now and to focus our energy together on this important theme of how do we awaken ourselves and the human community. We spent a good part of yesterday in meditation. We spent last night chanting, opening our hearts, invoking the higher energies, invoking the devatas. And I think it got off on a beautiful start. Today we're going to be exploring more of the mind stuff, the coming together of science and spiritual knowledge. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at how to work through samskaras individually and collectively, and how the role of love in awakening, and how love can help us neutralize release the samskaric imprints that we carry with us from one life to the next. We all carry so much from the past, things we remember and things we don't remember. How do we release these bondages from the past that keep us in samsara? And so this is about individual awakening and collective. I mean, now we have to work more consciously as a collective. I think more than ever before, as you both have said, we have to work more consciously as a collective world community to release the past. It seems sometimes that what's going on in the world is a rehashing of this old energy, these old mindsets, and we have to release them. So how to do that? Our rishis, our sages from different cultures, have given us the techniques. We know the way. It's a matter of practicing them, of following the guidelines that they have given us to release the old so that we can rise to a higher consciousness. And so the next few days, I think it's going to be filled with many discussions, both up here and in the private places, meeting places. So I look forward to that. And again, much gratitude for allowing this to take place here in Oroville.
And on that note of gratitude, inviting Sri Ravi and Ma'am. So, on that note of what's needed, so we begin with our session 1. And like Dana said, sometimes for something new to be born, something old probably needs to be shed away. So the session 1 is the transition from one era to another. As we move forward from here to explore what human consciousness needs to move to bring the human awakening that we really are looking forward, I'm now going to invite Sri Manoj Pavitran onto the dais. Manoj is the founder of Purnam Center for Integrality Education in Aurobindo. He's been here in Aurobindo for more than 25 years. He's immersed in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. And I'm going to invite Jeff, the managing director of Pro-Social World. Welcome, Jeff. And this session, or where we're exploring setting the context, what of the old structure needs to be changed or modified, what needs to happen for the awakening to even accelerate. The session facilitated by none other than Dana, inviting her onto the stage. So, over to Manoj, Jeff, and Dana.
Is this on? Yeah? Hi, Manoj and Jeff. So we're going to try to have informal discussions so we can create a more informal environment. My two friends, who I know well, we want to set the context for the next few days in terms of where we stand at this time of transition from one era to another, at a time when evolution seems more urgent, that there are ways that it can be facilitated and guided, and the necessity to do so because of the challenges that we face. So what types of changes, what does it look like when we talk about an evolution into a higher consciousness? We have about an hour for this. We can go a little bit over, but we have about an hour for this conversation. So I'm going to turn first to Manoj. From your perspective, from the teachings of Sri Aurobindo, what does this moment look like, and what is the trajectory ahead?
Thank you, Diana. Right now, we are sitting in a laboratory. In fact, the whole world has become a lab where transformation is happening, but we are clueless. We know that there is a crisis, but we are unable to make sense. And Mother has specially set up Aurobindo as a lab, and she said it's a place of spiritual and material research. And she also mentioned she has no separation or meaning. The separation between spiritual and material has no sense. It is one thing. And that's one of the fundamental problems to resolve. We have science and spirituality on one hand, on the material side, trying to make sense. On the other side, we have spiritual seekers trying to make sense. And both deny each other. And that was one of the key points Sri Aurobindo brought in. The denial of the spiritualist and the denial of the materialist. And in India, we can see that tradition of denying the world, and that has to be addressed. And that's from the spiritual side. When we look at the whole world, the manifest world, as an illusion, or it has no significance, only the spirit is real. And we need to find a way to disentangle ourselves from this immersion into this illusion and get back to the spirit. And they deny the existence of material world. And now that's a fundamental problem to be addressed, because this is where the battle is, in the material world. And then we have spiritual, material side, scientists denying the spirit. Everything is nothing but processes of matter, and things are just emerging. And these two ends coming together. And she created this lab, this vortex of transformation, in a moment of deep crisis that was in the 60s, when the Cold War was at its peak. Humanity was on the edge of self-destruction. And she wanted humanity to collaborate on one thing, on one project. Whereas on one side there is all the nations piling up the weapons of destruction, and she wanted one seed idea that can deflect that. And the whole conception of Aurobindo emerged, and all the nations came together to collaborate. Then at that time, Satprem was asking her, it will take a lot of time to build a city for 50,000 people. The crisis is now. Isn't it too late for a city to be made? But then she said, no. The very fact that nations choose to collaborate, that is the seed. That has its enormous impact in the world at an occult, subtle level that we cannot perceive. That tiny little gesture of all the nations coming together and seeding Aurobindo, that event itself was of an immense consequence at a subtle level to the world in transition. And then there was this barren land here, there was nothing, an empty canvas. Everything to be figured out. And you need people. And there was nothing, no water, no electricity. And the pioneers came. When I look back the 50 years of the journey, it's like the very first line of Aurobindo's charter, where Aurobindo belongs to nobody in particular. Aurobindo belongs to humanity as a whole, but to live in Aurobindo, you must be a willing servitor of the divine consciousness. So people who came willing to offer themselves to a process, they did not know how to go forward. But I'm willing. I'm clueless, but I'm willing. Oh, that's it requires colossal faith in the one who has given us the word. Here is a lab. You will figure this out. And throwing ourselves into this fire to figure this out. Then realizing the complexity of it. And one of the senior Aurobilians, Shraddhavan, who is no more, she was telling it takes tremendous courage to become a stupid Aurobilian. Because in the outside world, you have all the labels and you have all the systems and processes. Things are streamlined, efficient, working. And here is a place where even to get your bike repaired, it takes a long time. And at that time, there was nothing. And everything gets entangled. Everything gets into discussions and debates. Because we are coming from diverse cultures, with different languages, different understanding. And we don't even know how to listen. Forget about listening to others. Listening to ourselves. What am I serving at this moment? What impulse is driving me? To be a willing servitor. But it is a moment-to-moment thing. And we are driven by impulses that we do not understand. Driven by forces that we do not understand. And that is animating our perceptions, our actions, our words. And out of that impulsion, there is all these entanglements happening. And we are, like she referred to it as a Tower of Babel in reverse. Even to understand others, you need to understand yourself. What is triggering you looking at someone? Like we can't choose our brothers and sisters who came here for the lab and experimentation, but someone out there is looking so strange and it is triggering me. And this is, I'm coming from India and we have this golden standard of what it means to be spiritual. You know, this is a country with 5,000 years of experience in this lab. I mean, spiritual transformation, and it's like ISO 9000 standards, you know, how you should be, how you should not be, what you should be eating, what you should be saying, your politeness, your gentleness, everything. And we have a bunch of people who are none of this. And we expect the best practices to be followed by everyone, and if it is not, you are not doing the right thing. And I'm trying to fix you. And that intensity of trying to fix the other, everyone gets knotted up. And another strange thing is, the more we wake up to this impulsion that is driving to fix others, to fix this or that, the more we become aware of that impulsion and just sit back and say, this is not working. Now, relax. Let me just look at, because I see that my body is getting tight. My cells are getting tight. And the body is not telling any lies. That's one beautiful thing. My mind can interpret everything in wonderful ways, but my body is cracking up. And when the body becomes a reference, okay, learn to breathe. Just basics. Are you breathing in a relaxed way? Can you just relax? Instead of trying to convince the other person or trying to convert the other person. And the more you relax, and also the more you study the works of Mother and Sri Aurobindo and the methods that they have given, and you open to their light, and once we start accepting that what appears to be so many people, it's just one thing, one being playing with itself. Can I just relax into its lap and allow it to show me? Like the Upanishadic rishis will say, Kene shitam patati prekshitam manaha. Who is propelling your mind to fall on its objects? Then when we fall back upon it, that one being which is beyond me, and this body is only an instrumental condition through which it is acting, and it is acting through this body, that body, every other body. It is one being simultaneously acting through everyone. And can I listen to that? How is it guiding my perceptions? How is it moving my emotions? Am I in touch with that, or whether I have got cut off from it? And we see that most of the time we are off. Because we shrink, we isolate ourselves into the knots of the ego, and everything becomes very visible. You can't deny that you are suffering. Your body is clogged, cringing. And this is not a philosophical problem anymore. It is in the very physical frame of your very physical existence. And learning to build or learning to walk like a baby who doesn't know. Learning to walk, learning to breathe, learning to stand. It becomes very simple. And then to engage in work. And in work, that's where it gets really difficult. It's great to be alone in a cave and be a sage or a yogi. But in work, all our boundaries gets exposed. All our unconscious get exposed. And this is a field of karma yoga. And in action, and that requires the body to participate, it becomes evident where the fault lines are. No more philosophical, it's physical. Learning to do. In that, there is a knowing and being, everything coming together, enjoying and relaxing into the action of the one that is sweeping through all. Like if you look at Matra Mandir, you cannot deny the existence of it. Without people collaborating, something like that cannot manifest. It's an immensely complex project. And it has happened. But if you look at the process, it was messy. But in spite of having a messy process, which doesn't look like anything spiritual at all, from our conventional understanding, something marvelous is emerging. And you go there, there is an atmosphere. And there is something emerging. But when it is happening, you're in the battlefield. So that I love what Raghu often brings in, like what makes Arjuna is that accepting that you don't know. And that becomes very obvious that the more you enter into this arena of transformation, realize that I have no clue. But that's okay. There is grace that is taking us forward. I just would like to end with the Another friend, Aurobindo, he was saying, what we will do in our next birth, we will come back. It's messy, but we will come back. We won't give up. Another Aurobindo was, I read, he's saying, we are like mother's donkeys, standing in front of a wall of impossibility. And we are braying donkeys. And we won't give up. And there is an impossibility, state of not knowing, and at the same time, the faith. And we are not the scientists, we are the guinea pigs. It will be done. We have to give ourselves, we have to throw ourselves into the fire, and millimeter by millimeter, inch by inch, we make progress. We are going somewhere, and Sri Aurobindo has given an extensive mapping of the journey. The traveler of the worlds, he maps it out in detailed precision, which gives a sense of mental map. But when you're on the ground, you're clueless. You have only faith and sincerity.
I want to comment on a few things. It's the work of many lifetimes, not one lifetime. What we begin, we continue. But you said something, you touched upon something very important, and that is that the seed is planted in the subtle world, the causal world, before it manifests physically. So knowing that, so that is for everything. It has to first form in the world of thought, right? In the thought realm before it can manifest in matter. So isn't part of our spiritual work to be working in that realm, to try to manifest? I mean, we have to manifest as well, right? We have that potential to create the future, not just respond to conditions, but to participate in creating it, which means seeding those thoughts, working at that level, seeding those visions of the next stage in human evolution and what the future society is going to look like. I mean, is that sort of the work we're all doing now? Is forming the vision for what the next stage of human society will look like?
Yes, that seeding is what happened in the early decades. For example, we come here, there is nothing, there is a barren land, no water, nothing, you can't even get a shade. So what do you seed here? Literally trees. And people who came, they were not tree planters, they were artists, hippies of all kinds, of all variety, who did not know a thing about what it means to regenerate a land. Now, if you take that spirit and matter are one. Right. The subtle and gross are the same. Now, your encounter with matter itself is where it begins. So people were figuring out how to dig holes, how to harvest water, how to plant trees. And this is way before the green movement became known and popular in the world. And here is a lab, people were figuring out how to regenerate a land. And it took them decades to do that. Now, this is where interesting part is. Now, globally, ecology is a hot topic. But in 70s, it was not so. In 80s, it was still not so. It was beginning. But here, before the world began such a transformative work, here there were a bunch of people in a God-forsaken land who are misfits, crazy enough to regenerate a land. And in a small plot. And today it's a world movement. Another example, renewable energy. People were figuring out how to generate energy locally and even making windmills, very basic windmills. And today, globally, you see windmills everywhere. Similarly, non-ownership. Aurobindo belongs to nobody in particular. So here is the whole lab that doesn't belong to anyone. And you have to commit yourself to build things that doesn't belong to you. Now today it's a world movement, open source movement. You just have to replace the word Aurobindo with open source. Open source belongs to nobody in particular. It belongs to humanity as a whole. And open source systems are running world's servers quietly. We will not see them listed in the GDP because it is non-monetized. Another example, Aurobindo had been figuring out universal basic services. Basic services. How to provide basic support to everyone. It's not that we figured this out, but attempt. There is an aspiration, there is a struggle, there is an effort. Now it is globally a research work, universal basic income. So there is a relationship between the subtle and the material and the seed and what is unfolding in the planet. It's not linear cause and effect because it's one thing. We are deluded by the scale. In Savitri, Sri Aurobindo says, even one man's perfection can still save the world. Now, if we take that word to our heart, we have the key.
Jeff, would you respond?
Yes, I would. First, I'd like to just begin with humble gratitude to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother and the community of Auroville and the foundation and the governors and my friend Dina, who my friend Beyonce gave a new name, Connectananda. I feel really fortunate to be here, and I have some exceedingly good news to share. Because there's been some significant developments in a new science that is really an old science that has been reimagined, and it's evolutionary science. The old evolutionary science, or I should say classic evolutionary science, isn't particularly hopeful. It's based on genetic evolution, which takes a long time. It has a framework that is based on selfishness, the selfish gene theory. It doesn't offer much hope in terms of purpose because it's something that happens organically, randomly. And it doesn't have a worldview. But it is based on Darwin science. But there's a new dimension of Darwinism that some are calling completing the Darwinian revolution, that is based on cultural evolution. And that's very exciting because it can happen rapidly. And this is grounded in science. It's evidence-based. And there's a possibility that we know now that evolution can and really must be conscious. And culturally, we have the capacity to bring that consciousness to it. And we also have the methodology to be able to do that. And it can happen quickly. And there's also a possibility, again, grounded in science, that humanity itself has the capacity to be a conscious and compassionate superorganism. But for that to occur, it requires four things. One, it requires a grounding in evidence base. This is where science can facilitate it. It requires a worldview that is unified around unity and diversity and how they work together. It requires a practical toolkit, practices, principles, methodologies. It's not enough to hope for it. There needs to be a means to be able to embody that. And perhaps most importantly, it requires an integration of evolutionary science and sciences and evolutionary spirituality. It requires both of those. So the work that I'm involved in is this literally cutting edge work that is being named pro-social. Pro-social is defined as anything that is behavior that benefits others or benefits society as a whole. Pro-social. Beautiful name. Particularly coming out of a pandemic where we needed to socially distance. This is more about socially unifying. And it's grounded in really four sciences that are evolving together and four big ideas. So the first one is based in social or political science, and that's based on the work of a Nobel Prize winner in economics, Elinor Ostrom, that many people know. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009. And her and her husband were field researchers. And what they did is they researched communities and groups all over the world. And they were particularly interested in how some groups avoided something called the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons, in short, is that whenever you have a common pool resource, water, agriculture, and you have ungoverned competition for the resource, because of greed and selfishness, it tanks the resource, thus the tragedy. But what she discovered is that groups and communities were able to avoid that tragedy in very similar ways. And for that, she won the Nobel Prize in economics, even though she wasn't an economist. And she was the first woman to ever win the Nobel Prize in economics because it's historically been a boys' club. So she identified what she called 8 core design principles. And groups that operate well with these 8 core design principles, they tend to flourish. And those that don't, they tend to struggle. So there's a universal dimension to it, and it's evidence-based, and it's trainable or teachable, and it can be researched. And that's big news. That's really important because it is repeatable. So that's the first big idea and the first science. But then the next science, this new evolutionary science, really dispels a lot of the myths of classical evolution. This is based on not genetic inheritance, but symbolic inheritance. Because just like we inherit genes and have a genotype, we inherit symbols and have symbotypes. And that comes through our stories. It comes through our rites, comes through our rituals. And that's handed down. And that impacts and imprints future generations. And if those stories, if those practices and traditions are incorrect or untrue, then essentially impregnating that into our culture. And so we need to be very intentional about the stories that we're telling, about what we're sharing culturally with each other and with our youth and future generations. And the second thing is that the selfish gene theory has been proven to be profoundly untrue. Not true. Human beings aren't inherently selfish. One of the big takeaways from Darwinism was the survival of the fittest, competition. But what we now know, and in the historical record, is that the main driver of evolution is always cooperation, not competition. Competition on the small level, but always cooperation on the larger level. There's a saying that my colleague and co-founder of Pro-Social World had mentioned that is being repeated. He said that selfishness beats altruism in small groups. Altruism beats selfishness in larger groups, and everything else is commentary. And the essence of that is that cooperation on the community level, on the organizational level, on the network level, and the network of networks level, hands down, drives, essentially purifies the environment of selfish behavior. And there's means by which that it self-regulates with that. The other thing about the new evolutionary theory is that it's not random, that it can be conscious. And now we're faced with two existential crises, the environmental crisis and nuclear war, both man-made. Both require human solutions. And so the capacity to be able to address these head-on is right there. And it's interesting that this new kind of capacity, one is that what Eleanor Ostrom discovered in her research, she didn't think up, it was already inherent. It's part of the human condition. We're inherently social, and we inherently are cooperating beings when we have the right kind of conditions that support it. And that evolution can be conscious, and that if you take that up to the ultimate scale, the planetary scale, it can become super conscious. And not just for the well-being of humanity, but for the well-being of the whole earth ethic. So that's the second one, the new evolutionary science. But what's also happened is that this framework, and that's what it is, it's not a course or a teaching, it's a framework that's evolving. And it's evolving with a number of sciences that are beginning to cooperate together in a very unusual way. And the next science is contextual behavioral science. modern psychology and psychological methods that are done contextually. And what that does is it provides part of the toolkit. Because in order for individuals to change, in order for groups to change, in order for groups of groups to change, there needs to be a means by which to become psychologically flexible. Because otherwise you can have the will, but if you don't have the means, hard to do. So this provides means by which human beings and groups can become flexible so that they can cooperate together. And then the fourth one, and this is the cutting edge, because this framework that is a cooperative framework, you might think of it as the playbook for cooperation. The fourth one is kind of the leading edge, and the one that I think that a community like this would be the most interested in. And that is the integration and the exploration. And I love what you said about, this being a laboratory, because that's very humble in terms of we're exploring this together. And this is how it works. The groups explore this framework together. And that is the integration of evolutionary science with evolutionary spirituality. Because spirituality needs to evolve just like everything else. And ultimately, what's so beautiful about what's happening here is that the new evolutionary science is a wonderful framework for spirituality to find deep and profound common ground with science, and then with other sciences as well. It becomes a wonderful meeting place where they can find ways to cooperate and work together. I'll stop there.
I wanted to ask you, Manoj talked about the vision of matter and spirit being one, whereas our society has polarized, it's divided. There's spirit, there's matter. So this new framework you're talking about, does that, because you're talking about spirituality, all these sciences beginning to cooperate, will that lead to a more unified vision of reality, of matter being just an expression of spirit? Is that how you would say it? I mean, matter is an expression of spirit. There's no division.
So what appears to be happening is that everyone's looking out different lenses. The sciences, the human focus areas, they're looking out different lenses. But what are they looking at? They're looking at the mystery, whether they're looking at it from the inside out or from the outside in. So in this new evolutionary framework, one of the beautiful things is that it provides a laboratory for experimenting how those that are approaching coming to the mystery from the lens of the rational, science, evidence, with the trans-rational, faith, spirituality, religion. And for this to happen, there needs to be a safe place. Just like when we're working through pain and trauma, there needs to be safety for that to heal. And there's a lot of healing that needs to be done between science and spirituality. Well, this becomes a safe place, a cooperative framework with a toolkit that allows for this exploration to take place, which probably most of us believe they'll looking at the same thing from two different points of view. And there was a time where science and spirituality were traveling parallel paths, and they diverged. And there's an opportunity for it to converge now. This is the time of convergence. And the other thing, too, is that I can't help but think that this work is profoundly connected to Sri Aurobindo's fifth vision. It just feels like this is swirling around that somehow. So that's how I'd answer that.
You know, I mean, you touched upon some important things when you talked about, I mean, our society, we've been ingrained with, you know, selfishness is good. Competition is how you get ahead. Freedom, I mean, the whole concept of freedom is so I mean, what is freedom? Freedom for what? Freedom to harm others? Freedom to do what you want? Or soul freedom? I mean, so all of these concepts need to be reinterpreted, really. And so what sounds like what you're saying is that we're at the beginning of a point where even science may be beginning to look at these values that we have interpreted in one way that form the basis of our societies, moving beyond all of that and coming to new understandings of what that would look like. And I've thought a lot in recent years about this whole notion of freedom. What is freedom? What do we mean by freedom? Because I think it's been so misused. People interpret it as I'm free to do whatever I want. You know, don't bother me. And that's not the meaning of freedom. Do you want to add anything, Manoj?
Yeah, I want to add, when we refer to evidence-based approach or an intentional approach, what do we mean by evidence? Whose evidence? These become very critical. Like, how do we know truth? Here, our current highest faculty of knowing is reason. In today's evolutionary stage, reason is our most developed faculty. And there is a scientific research that gathers data, comes up with evidence looking at the patterns. But reality appears quite differently once what we refer to as the yogic process begins, where you enter into a deep silence and stillness. Your action is arising from that space. As your mind enters a deep silence, all the mental models get washed away with it. You have no mental reference for action. Because we are, in terms of evolution, we are transcending reason. Age of reason is coming to an end. And we are entering into a subjective age. And Sri Aurobindo says we are moving towards a spiritual age. But when we are entering into subjective age, leaving behind reason and its models, there is nothing to hold on in terms of a mental model. If we use a mental model, we get stuck in the mind. So when we drop it, what we have is a deep silence and stillness. And with whom are you collaborating in that space? This is where, in that subjective space, the complexity of our inner nature comes up, where it is no more limited to this body, it is intersubjective or it is universal, and there are all kinds of forces arising. So the question, again repeatedly coming back, is with whom are you collaborating? Because every individual is a transmission point of different types of forces to which they are subjectively open. And Sri Aurobindo points out there is something the Vedic rishis refer to as Agni, which is the evolutionary impulsion behind all things, not just me and you and all that. It's universal force with which we can collaborate and open to, and let that act, it will form the right mental models as and when it is required. But this requires what you are referring to as the psychological flexibility, receptivity. And that requires a condition where, first of all, you're empty of all the models, all the thinking. Like when Patanjali starts the yoga with yoga chitta vritti nirodha, once all the chitta vrittis come to an end, you're an empty clearing from where you need to act, and there is all the subjective forces battling for you, because you are an instrument through which anything can act. We are constantly surrendering to one or other force. And there is a whole spectrum of forces that want you to be their instrument. There are forces of reason, there are forces of emotions, sensations, and vast forces that transcend our present individuality, open into a collective, subjective space where there is a whole sludge of the entire human past and its pain and sorrow wanting to burst out through you, or there is something from above entering into you, molding you, shaping you. So your cognitive faculties are getting molded in the process. And there is a transformation that comes with it, where it starts when you drop all the mental models and to develop the simple attitude, or at least convincing the mind that it is one thing that I'm engaging with, not many different things. And it is not a structure, it's a conscious force. And how do I surrender to that? And how do I discern what I'm surrendering to is the right force? Here, the basic reference, the first condition to be established in you as an instrument, you also realize that you are the lab. And to discern the signal from the noise, this lab must be made silent and still, so that the impulsion of that vast, we can say cosmic force or mother's force or the divine force, Agni rising from below and ascending to a greater perfection, and a grace that is pouring into the instrument without distortions. Because the moment you're cringing, the receptivity is gone. The psychological flexibility, when it is reactive, when it is impulsive, it gets entangled in all kinds of forces. Like anger is not my anger, your anger, somebody else's anger. It is a universal force. Laziness is not my laziness, your laziness. Just like gravity, it is universal. So all the psychological forces are operating through everyone, and dropping all that, entering into something that is vast, something that is free, and letting that work through you in your silence, where it gives you the vision of this is the next step to do. You know nothing else beyond that. And you know the evidence of that you've taken a right step in your very body. The evidence is right in the body, where you're at peace. The moment you take a wrong step, your inner poise is gone. So it's very important, what is the evidence we are using in navigating through this complexity? And when we develop psychological flexibility to what we are opening to, because there are forces that are universal and destructive. And reference points to know what am I surrendering to? The willing servitor of what? And what is the evidence by which I know? Your very bodily substance becomes the reference. Evidence is there. So that's something that I would like to bring into this conversation.
Yeah, so we have another few minutes. Respond to that.
Yeah. It's a really important question in terms of evidence. And part of what's being called for now is we need to build bridges to get to the further shore. Even if we know what the further shore is, many don't, but we need bridges to get to the further shore. And the evidence, and one of the things about this is that the focal point of this work is the group and the community more than an individual. The individual is part of it, but part of it as a participant in a group or a community or a network. So there's this inherent surrender that is part of that. And one of the things that comes to mind that I think is a profound piece of wisdom that Thich Nhat Hanh graced us with, and I'll paraphrase it, and that is that perhaps the Buddha of the future is the Sangha, the community. And perhaps the means of spiritual tradition, of spiritual transmission is beginning to change. And maybe it's beginning to come through the collective versus an avatar or from above or beyond is collectively recognizing, Tatwamase, thou art that.
I certainly hope it's not the end of the avatars and the gurus. We want them to keep coming. I think we're going to, unless is there any kind of closing comment that either one of you want to make? I mean, it's a conversation that we'll have over the next few days. It's ongoing. What is this? I mean, this process that we're in that is that is pushing forward the evolution has many manifestations. Yeah.
Sangha as the future avatar, or even a collective has its collective mind and its collective issues, and so we can also surrender to a collective and its ego. And there is a big danger of that tragedy of the commons and the mess that we create. And here is a space where Mother and Sri Aurobindo refers to soul of the group soul. Matrimandir represents that. And there is a nation soul, group soul, there is a group ego, nation's ego. So discerning between larger forms of ego and attuning with the group soul, surrendering to that and that alone will be crucial.
And a group karma, national karma,
national karma,
a karma of a particular collective. Yeah.
Because it enters into you.
So just one final reflection on that. There's this thing in this new evolutionary science called multi-level selection. And it's critically important, and it relates to what we're just saying. Because we have to look at development, evolution in context. So for instance, if we look at the organism level, what's good for a cell may not be good for the body. Cancer. What's good for me may not be good for you or for my family. Selfishness. What's good for us, or me versus us, what's good for my family may not be good for my clan.
Or the species, what's good for humanity.
It goes all the way up the scale. I mean, you have nepotism and cronyism at that level. You know, at the level of the nation, you have racism, you have nationalism. You know, what's good maybe for now, maybe not good for later. You know, the tension between economic growth and environmental sustainability. So context is critically important, but it also explains, because when we don't look at multi-level selection, which is one of the three tenets of evolution: selection, replication, retention, that what we have to be mindful and attentive to what we're selecting for on a soul level, on an organizational level, because if we don't, evolution doesn't take us necessarily to where we want to go, unless it's conscious and intentional. And if it is, then what we can do is make sure that we're selecting for things and recognizing the impact of selection at other levels that impact it, so that we don't have unintended consequences, which is what's happening now. Good people, good organizations, good intentions, oftentimes with unintended consequences. Like, why? Why does this keep happening? Partly because of context. We need to understand multi-level selection of how these different streams and frames are entering into the equation.
It's a conversation that can go on, but I think we're going to take a break here for 15 minutes. It's 11:45. We'll come back here. Is there tea?
Yes, there's refreshments at the back. There's herbal tea and some fruits that's kept for you all.
We'll take a tea break and come back here in 15 minutes.
Just simple things. When you step out of the door, just opposite to the door is the drinking water facility. If you take left and walk to the dining area, that's where the refreshments will be served. And the washrooms are just behind it. So this is just to take care of some hygienical factors. So 15 minutes per round. There's some herbal tea, some juice, some fruits. Just please help yourself. We'll ring a small gong, and that's just an indication for you all to come back into the Sangha. Thank you for your patience, and I hope this has been a really enriching session so far. together, ask those deep reflective questions. It's almost like a tapas of a fire that allows us to purify. Yesterday we had a tapas that was deeply meditative with the different chants. We had the tapas of the music that resonated in our heart. And today the tapas is that of asking those questions, those fundamental questions, which each one of us is on the quest, right? And with that gift, and with that, we move to session 2. And the session 2 is what's called as the state of science. Yeah, because we would love to bring in the perspective of what science has, what's their lens on what's the path forward for the awakening of the human consciousness. A number of scientists in the past decade, they have begun to challenge common assumption of the mainstream science about the nature of universe. The Institute of Noetic Sciences in California has been one of the leaders in this area. Very shortly, we will watch a 20-minute video by Dr. Dean Radin, who is the chief scientist at this institute. What he's going to be doing is sharing some of his research in a video presentation. He would have loved to be here, but we brought his voice out of here and his presence from across the seas. We have here Dr. Shraddhalu Ranade. He's a scientist and an educator. He's of the Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry. Is it in Pondicherry you're coming? Yes. And he has met him and worked along with him in the field of ether energy. So I'm sure after listening to Dr. Dean, we will have Shraddhalu who will expand on this concept, inviting you to hold on to your chairs, give a deep listening, and if there are questions coming in, I'm sure Shraddhalu will be more than happy to answer them. And yes, if there have been questions in the morning session, and if you feel they've been answered, lovely. If not, feel free. It is an interactive sessions, but we will keep to the time limits for sure from now on. So thank you so much, and the video screening.
I am Dean Radin, Chief Scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I'm going to be talking today about science and spirituality. Here's my slide. Very happy to give this short video for the Auroville Summit. First of all, what is science? Science is a set of methods for observing and analyzing nature, explanations of those observations, and also a theoretical worldview. What is spirituality? Spirituality is a sense of something bigger, more meaningful, or more numinous. And it involves experiences that transcend ordinary, what we might think of as naive reality. What can science study about these experiences that transcend time and space? Well, we call them psychic phenomena. That includes things like mental connections at a distance, perceptions that transcend space and time, and what I'll talk about a little bit today is direct mental effects on distant physical systems. So if you ask many scientists today, here's an example of Steven Weinberg, a Nobel laureate physicist, well, what do they think about psychic phenomena? Well, Weinberg said the following: if there was anything about psychic phenomena, that would really be the discovery of the century. In fact, it would be more than that. It would overturn all the centuries of work since the birth of modern science. And Grumpy Cat says, no, it wouldn't. But what gives rise to this level of skepticism so that people are so confident to say that these kinds of experiences, which are very common, cannot exist? Well, it's all about our worldview. It's about how we look at the world, which is a set of assumptions and beliefs. In certain perspectives, these kinds of phenomena are literally impossible, and in others, it is possible. So the two major theories here, the two types of glasses that somebody might wear, the theory one is used today in the neurosciences. It is, as Francis Crick said, we're nothing but a pack of neurons. In other words, you are your brain, period. Or as Marvin Minsky once said, we're machines made of meat. This is a nihilistic idea. The philosophy is of nihilism. Everything is pointless. It's also reductive materialism. It is the scientific worldview today. That's why so many scientists think that psychic phenomena cannot exist. But there's another theory. This one comes from the esoteric traditions mostly, but also Eastern philosophy, where consciousness is viewed as fundamental, more fundamental than the physical world. Theory 2 has been around for much longer than Theory 1. But as I said, nevertheless, Theory 1 is the prevailing scientific viewpoint. So we can ask two questions here. The first question is there any evidence that mind interacts with matter? And then the second question is, well, if there is, well, then how does it work? So this question, the first one, has been asked for a very long time. In the 1600s, when Sir Francis Bacon began empiricism, which was part of the rise of science, one of the things he talks about how to test was what he called the force of imagination. And the way that he suggested to test that was by tossing dice. Well, 300 years later, J.B. Rhine at Duke University was tossing dice in a scientifically valid way and measuring the results to see whether intention could make dice fall a certain way, just as Francis Bacon was suggesting. After 50 years of that, a meta-analysis shows that, yes, there is a real effect. It's quite small, but real. This transitioned into a new type of technology, which is electronic, which does the equivalent of dice tossing or coin flipping, but in an electronic way. So there's an example of one about 30 years ago. Now you could buy something on a memory stick size that is a very good true random number generator. So here's how one of these things looked about 15 years ago. All they do is produce series of random bits. So it produces a random walk, if you look at it over time, something like that. And you give someone instructions while it's producing a series of random bits to aim high, intentionally make more ones appear. And then you see whether or not you get that result. So you repeatedly do this experiment. You aim high, you aim low, and then you have a baseline. So here's one example of a program that was run for 12 years at Princeton University with a random number generator. And so what they found was when people were aiming high, sure enough, the results over many, many trials, it went high significantly. And when they aimed low, it went low, and then the baseline, it went according to baseline. So back in 1989, a colleague and I did a meta-analysis looking at all of the studies that were conducted so far and published, looking at whether mind influences random systems. So we found over 800 experiments and very clear results, unequivocal effects in experimental conditions indicating that mind influences elementary probabilities in these physical systems. And in control conditions where nobody was trying to influence anything, chance results. So does intention influence water? Is a test that we've just done a few years ago. And this is illustrating that the types of experiments that can be done, many have been done, hundreds, thousands at this point, on many different kinds of physical systems. So why were we interested in water? Well, because there are people who do various kinds of healing techniques called Reiki, therapeutic touch, Joe Ray, and so on. So we had 17 different kinds of healers come to our laboratory and work on a total of 190 patients, one at a time. And so what we did is we took a little aliquot of water and had it put on a necklace around the healer, and we also took another aliquot of water and put it on the patient. This was laboratory-grade distilled water, and the protocol was very simple. We did a pre-test to look at the spectrographic analysis of the water before the healing period, 30 minutes of healing, and then 30 minutes post-test. We used the standard spectroscopic methods. This happened to be a ATR FTIR technique, which is quite sensitive. That's what it looked like. And the sensors in it had to be cooled with liquid nitrogen. So it's quite sensitive. Before you do this kind of test, because it's so exquisitely sensitive, you put the aliquots in a water bath and make sure that the temperature of the water in the pre and post are the same. This method of spectrometry works by sending an infrared beam through a crystal, and you have a very, very thin layer of water. And so it bounces again and again through the water, and then you have a detector. And it was looking at what resonant frequencies appear in the water, which reflect what is going on in the molecules. So it's based on resonance, and there's different kinds of molecular bonds that you can then see. So this is the pre-post result. So statistically, very strong and significant difference. There's that red line is the pre, and the blue line is the post. And what it means is, in this case, that the hydrogen-oxygen bond, covalent bond, this one's called a stretching bond, it changed. And this was not our original experiment. We were actually replicating a study that found a very similar result 20 years before, again, using Healer and using a water structure. So it looks like intention, even though it wasn't directed at the water, made a significant and measurable effect in the water itself. Well, what about other things? Like, can we use intention to influence how people respond to food? The food that we used was pieces of chocolate. This is a gourmet brand of chocolate. And the protocol was double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled. We asked the Mongolian shaman that we know, and also this is a Buddhist monk. Here's the Mongolian shaman. Here we are showing that the shaman is going to treat or bless these pieces of chocolate, and we had identical chocolate set aside. And the Buddhist monk did the same thing. So here's the blessed chocolate. Here's the controlled chocolate. In each case, we recruited people to eat the chocolate, and they knew they might get blessed chocolate, they might not, but they didn't know. That was a double-blind component of it. Each person over the course of a week was asked to fill in a standardized mood questionnaire. And so on these 3 days, they would eat the chocolate at 10 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but we got their mood recorded every day over the course of the week. And the hypothesis was that if there was a difference in eating blessed chocolate, which was designed to improve their mood, that's what the blessing was, we would see the effect primarily on these 3 days. And so this is the results that we got. This happens to be a measure of mood, which is called mood disturbance. So going down is actually better in this test. And that's what we got. By the third day of eating chocolate, which was this day here, these are 95% confidence intervals, we got a significant difference between the blessed and controlled chocolate under double-blind conditions. So a colleague got interested in this and said, well, maybe we can try doing this with tea. So we took a big batch of oolong tea, separated it into 2 piles. One would be blessed and the other was not. So the blessed tea was blessed by 3 Buddhist monks at a temple in Taiwan, and the controlled tea was set aside. So then we put this tea in 100 bottles and that tea in 100 bottles, and we recruited 100 people in each one of these 2 conditions. Again, under blinded conditions, so they didn't know whether they had the treated or the controlled tea. In this case, we used a measure called change in mood, so going up is good. And once again, we found by the 3rd day of eating chocolate, which was day 5, a significant difference in the direction of the blessed chocolate. People reported better mood under blinded conditions. Well, what about influencing plant growth? So again, we were using a physical target, in this case, Arabidopsis thaliana, which is a plant that's used pretty often in studies that are looking at plant physiology. So we used the same 3 monks in the temple in Taiwan, and they were asked to bless water, in this case, that would be used to treat the seeds of these particular plants. And we had the identical water set aside as control. So there's the control water, the blessed water. There were bottles from the same factory produced at the same time, but then separated and blessed in the appropriate way. So this is double blind in the sense that the technician that was dealing with the growth of the seeds did not know which of the water mediums they had. In one case, one was blessed, in the other case, it was controlled, but they didn't know that. They just dealt with the seeds the way that they would normally. What these are indicating here are we use different mutations of these seeds. These are mutations that either have overexpress growth due to blue light, or underexpress it, or are the wild type. So we did that because we had a guess that if we saw an effect, that it would be largest in a mutation that overexpresses when exposed to blue light. So the measures that we did, we grew the plants. The measures was a number of things that we looked at, but the primary measure was called the hypocaudal, which is the distance from the top of the roots to the bottom of the first leaves. And so a healthy plant has a short, fat hypocaudal. A not so healthy plant will have a long, skinny hypocaudal. So the prediction was a short, fat hypocaudal. And that's what we got. So here's our control, this size of the plant, of the hypocaudal length, and the treated was shorter and fatter. I'm not showing the size of it here, but if it's short, it's going to be fatter. So this was extremely significant. There's no question that the treated seeds in this case were healthier than the non-treated seeds, getting control versus treated water. That was the only difference. Well, so I could go through this for hours, showing evidence for mind-matter interaction, for telepathy, for clairvoyance, the whole range of psychic phenomena, many, many tests, thousands. What do statisticians say, who are specialists in analyzing data, when they look at these kinds of reports? Well, so here is Jessica Utz. She was president of the American Statistical Association in 2016, and she had been hired by the US government to evaluate these kinds of studies. So what she said then to the assembled statisticians of the world, and part of her 2016 presentation at their conference, that the data in support of precognition and possibly other related psychic phenomena are quite strong statistically and would be widely accepted if they pertained to something more mundane. Likewise, in 2018, Etzel Cardinha is a professor at Lund University in Sweden. He looked at 10 different meta-analyses, or 10 classes of experiments that have been done in psychic phenomena, each one ranging from dozens to hundreds of repeated experiments to see whether the evidence for psychic phenomena was good or not so good. And his conclusion was this: the evidence for psi, short for psychic phenomena, is comparable to that for established phenomena in psychology and other disciplines. In fact, if you look at the effect size in these studies, not only are they statistically significant, but the effect size is actually very, very similar in many of these experiments to what you see in standard psychology experiments. This is why he's saying that the evidence for psi is essentially the same as it is for other kinds of phenomena that would be considered mundane, just like Jessica Utz said. So what we consider to be mundane is, again, a matter of worldview, what we think, what we expect to see. So the empirical evidence is very clear at this point. Why is this continue to be controversial? Well, as I said, it's because we have an outdated worldview. The worldview of materialism, today's science, assumes that everything starts with physics. And from there you get chemistry, and from there you get biology, and then you get psychology. And somehow magically, in a way that nobody understands, suddenly we become aware. We get awareness. So the mystery here is, how do you get from a purely physical system into something which is no longer physical? Because our conscious awareness is subjective. It doesn't have a physical component to it, as best as we can tell. So this is a puzzle. And because of this puzzle, philosophers imagine that somehow we're like zombies. We're physical creatures that have the appearance of being conscious, but not really. So from that perspective, these psychic phenomena are denied as impossible. That's where the complaint comes from. And we don't want to throw away this model of materialism because it's quite good at certain things. It's just not good at everything. In particular, it's not good in understanding the nature of consciousness. So the flip side of materialism in a philosophical sense is idealism. So idealism looks exactly the same, except we have to move consciousness down below physics. Or this is the idea that consciousness is primary over the physical world. And so everything remains the same in terms of our textbooks on physics and chemistry and biology and psychology. We don't need to throw those away at all. All we need to do is imagine that there is a more fundamental assumption that involves consciousness in some way. It's fundamental in some way. So from this perspective, if you hold this worldview, well, suddenly these psychic things are perfectly acceptable because they're easy to understand. Because if your awareness is primary over physics, it transcends physics, then all of these effects suddenly become, well, what's the big deal? Why is this even considered controversial at all? What I've just said is actually an emerging worldview. If you look within information science, quantum mechanics, mathematics, and neuroscience, these authors are all mainstream people, and these are thought leaders in their disciplines. And you take the example here of Christoph Koch, for example, a neuroscientist. He says, I believe that consciousness is a fundamental, an elementary property of living matter. It can't be derived from anything else. This has been said again and again by scientists in many different fields. It is a minority opinion today, but I believe that we're seeing the beginning of a paradigm change. We're seeing a change in terms of what we think consciousness is. Likewise, you see this reflected in a growing number of academic presses. So Columbia, Oxford, the American Psychological Association, and the American Institutes of Physics, all having books now written by mainstream people who are saying something about our previous ideas about the structure of reality may have been slightly wrong. And the slightly wrong aspect of it is that there's, first of all, psychic phenomena, and second of all, something about our nature, our ideas of consciousness are probably not correct. So here's the bottom line. First of all, there's 140 years of scientific evidence at this point, which says to quite a dramatically strong degree that the mind and the brain are not the same thing. The mind or consciousness transcends the brain in some way. The second is that there's increasing evidence that consciousness is causal. It can do things outside of your body. The third is that the scientific worldview is slowly changing. That is, changing at all is already interesting, but this change that we're talking about is pretty radical. It's a radical change. And the last part is that the implications of this change are, first of all, that there are no secrets. That's what telepathy tells us, and also clairvoyance, and also that minds matter. So when these ideas become embedded into a new vision of reality, it will change civilization. It has to, because civilization today is kind of resting on the scientific worldview in many ways. So if that worldview changes, civilization is going to change. We hope in a positive direction, I think so, but we'll have to see what happens. And so with that, I thank you for your kind attention, and I hope you have a wonderful summit. There's a more fun.
Thank you, Dr. Radin, for a fascinating presentation. He could not be here physically, but he is with us in mind, and you can feel him perhaps. He made some very important observations in the overall presentation, which I want to highlight. But first, just as a background to him, Dr. Radin is undoubtedly today the world's foremost researcher in parapsychological phenomena. There is nobody like him. The scope of phenomena that he has covered, the depth into which he has gone, the number of variations of the most strict double-blind tests which are unquestionable, the teams he has built up as his students who are now continuing his work and further amplifying it, he has no equal. And this should be an inspiration for all of us. And I say this especially for us here in Aurobindo. And I'll come back to this towards the end, why this is so important. But to put his presentation in context, we have a wrong sense that science is a monolith that moves as one big mass. So you will find the media often speaking of, it is the phrase they use, confirmed science or proven science or validated science. Well, what he just showed you is confirmed, proven, validated, and yet nobody speaks about it in the media. It's not part of your textbooks. It's not part of the new worldview in the new education or in society. It's still held back. And you have to ask yourself why. And the reason goes to something much deeper, because science as a body finally is made of scientists. And as human beings, we have our own prejudices. And more important, especially for this question, is our fears, our insecurities, our egos. If you've spent all your life and you've won multiple awards for an assumption which now is proven to be false, would you dedicate time to throwing away all your reputation? You wouldn't. And so there's this huge, massive ego in the entire structure, in the system itself. The ego of the system, of the pride of science. And then the scientists who have insecurities, what do we do if suddenly, as he said, minds matter? Suddenly our assumption of objectivity feels like it would be thrown out. Dr. Ryden made this very interesting observation. If you put back consciousness at the bottom, then nothing changes. Well, he's right to an extent. Nothing changes. Your physics, chemistry, biology, psychology stay as they are, as your textbooks, at the first step. But the second step now would be, how does physics emerge from consciousness? And what is the relationship of the physics with consciousness? What is the mediator between these two things? How does chemistry or biology get influenced by consciousness? What is the mediator there? And when you start asking these questions, all those textbooks will get rewritten. The physics equations would still be valid, perhaps, but the interaction between consciousness and the atoms or subatomic particles and the mechanism of the interactions, and then the problem, the freedom that consciousness brings, which can now impose itself upon those set, fixed, so-called laws, would upend the very concept of laws of physics. We would have to replace that word with something Sri Aurobindo repeatedly said, habits of nature. So there is a habit of subatomic particles, and then there's the consciousness underlying which can awaken and swing those habits and modify those habits. Surely that would require a lot of rewriting, isn't it? It would throw the rigidity of physics into some kind of a doubt. And so there is a real practical problem, even once you recognize that consciousness is involved at the very foundations of the whole evolutionary emergence. And then there's the bigger philosophical question. How did it get there to begin with? Isn't it? Because our experience of consciousness is not inside our body tissue at the grade of matter itself. It is as if top down, which is why they put it at the top in the beginning. What is the relationship of this awakened consciousness and that, supposedly by theory we say, but do we experience it? No. What's the relation between these two? And the answer to most of you here is already there. Sri Aurobindo alone, I think, in modern times articulates it in these words to say consciousness involves itself into matter, and then out of that inconscience of matter emerges in the evolution of consciousness. What are the implications now? Again, from this comes, what are the implications of this involving consciousness versus the evolving consciousness? How do they relate to each other? Now, this has profound implications for evolution itself. Because one of the suggestions it gives you is the emergent consciousness, let's say through the physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, is not emergent in itself and alone without assistance. The involving consciousness above, which is already free, can reach out, linkage with the emergent consciousness and assist the emergence and thereby accelerate the emergence. The implications for our human evolution are tremendous. It means that it's not just our effort or before our conscious effort, nature's instinctive drive. We can also consciously open out and call down or aligned to link with a higher grade of consciousness, and it can assist us to lift. Now, all of these implications suddenly open up if you make that one single change. But it means everything gets appended somehow. Yes, equations will remain same and all the rest which is there, The textbooks would be seen as a subset of a larger body of knowledge, which we may even refer to, and Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase, a larger science, and I will perhaps use a phrase which for me is more comfortable, a spiritual framework of science, which is including all the gradations of consciousness and reality without neglecting any or biasing itself against any. Such would be necessarily the future of what Dr. Radin concluded with the new civilization. Inevitable. The consequences enormous. If once you recognize all the implications that we summarized very rapidly, it means from childhood, from the time you're born, what's the sense of the purpose of life? Awakening of consciousness. What would you do to participate in that awakening of consciousness? The entire educational framework would have to be revised. We're not here merely to train ourselves to become better workers or to pass exams. We're here to grow in consciousness. What does that mean? What are all the different facets? What are all the levels? What are all the gradations, powers, faculties of consciousness on each of those levels? And how can we amplify them? That would be the deeper sense of education itself. And then life that you would live. Why do you live life? What do you live for? All that automatically undergoes a huge change. And how would we assess our success in life? Where the old civilization assessed it by how much material you can gather or what number of digits you have in the bank account or how popular or famous you can be. Now you'll say, I really don't care for all that. I can experience a whole new realm of consciousness. And suddenly, with all that, the entire body of the yoga knowledge, the entire body of the spiritual traditions would not be deprecated, but would be looked towards by emergent science and saying, what can we learn from these and how can these enlighten us? And that's very hard for the ego of science to let go. Because all these years they did throw out all that, isn't it? So we do have a crisis. And as I said, the science as a body does not move as a monolith. As with human evolution, we do not all move together one day to the next, the mass of humanity taking a step together. Rather, it is a few who are precursors, forerunners, pioneers, in whom the first awakening begins to take place against the resistance and the ridicule of all others. And then after a while, when that number grows a little bit more, then others say, yes, of course, but I said it 20 years ago. I forget that I ridiculed it. And then eventually, when the body is large enough, then everyone says, oh yeah, of course, it's evident. I don't know why those old people could not get it. I was one of them, remember? So this is how it's going to happen, or rather, this is how it is already happening. Dr. Dean Radin is one of those who's on the cutting edge. All of us here, perhaps, not as scientists, but at least in our aspiration, in our worldview, are choosing to align with this new worldview and the new civilization that it implies. The entire purpose of life changes, the entire sense of evolution itself, and our vision for the future changes. What currently we have as a vision for the future is 20 years from now we will have superior technology, but what will we do? If you asked a monkey, you know what, one day you're going to learn to think. How do you think you're going to live your life? I will swing from larger trees and make larger leaps from branch to branch. And I will eat larger quantities of food. That's all he can think of, right? So when a human being is asked, well, you're emergent into a new grade of consciousness, what are you going to do? I will satisfy my desires more dramatically, more largely. You kind of missed the point. There's a whole new grade of consciousness and a new experience possible. Just the last few days, I had occasion to be in contact with somebody, a Frenchman by the name of Marc Aubin, who considers himself, he calls himself a voyager. At the age of 15, he had spontaneous out-of-body experiences. Today, he's training people to have out-of-body experiences. And one of the things which comes from his narration and the people who are following in his footsteps, they say that the experience of the higher grades of consciousness and the worlds is so extraordinary. So extraordinary that anything you have as a human being pales against it. And once you have tasted that, you would never be satisfied with these little things. Do you recall vaguely Sri Aurobindo's words in this direction? In his Thoughts and Aphorisms, when Sri Aurobindo points out that if humanity had just one brief glimpse of all the ranges, and I will have to paraphrase, the ranges of vast peace, oceans of silence, beauty, delight, realms of power and bliss and light, all these things, even a brief glimpse, he says, if we had, we would leave everything else and not rest till we had realized those. And this is what happens to people who get their first glimpse. And all this really shows us we are on the threshold of a new civilization. Sri Aurobindo articulates it as the spiritual age. The passage in between is what was referred earlier as the subjective age that we are passing through. But which age would you like to live in is really the question we have all to come back to. And we have to choose. If we do nothing, eventually we will get pushed there, however long it gets. If we choose now, we can all begin to participate already, passing through our own rapid subjectivism, maybe in a few weeks or years at most, and enter into our own individual spiritual age and begin to live that and articulate, express, realize that. And if we can do that as a collectivity, that's when Auroville's purpose would be fulfilled. We're meant to be, as a community, forerunners of the spiritual age to be realized here and now in our lives, however much it may take in between in terms of a transitional passage. But collectively, if we can do this, then in the whole of the earth, in humanity, it would be that little tip at the top of that cutting edge of the pioneering movement, which would make rapid the whole earth's awakening into it, which was the mother's purpose in creating Auroville. So this is the broad consequence of what we have seen as the presentation by Dr. Dean Radin. I was intending originally to actually share many more such examples and experiences, studies from the field of science, but I think placing these implications before us is so much more important. I'll still touch upon a few examples of things being done in the laboratory setting as emergent from acceptance of consciousness at the very basis of things, but what it represents as psychological and psychic powers, because it gives us a hint of that which the monkey cannot imagine of human life and what the human cannot imagine of the supra-human life. Of course, there will be gradations. But a lot of the examples I will give are also relating to matter, because that's the domain where we can most directly first recognize a superior, as we call it, psychic power or parapsychological power. So I first refer to an example which is on record of Jean-Pierre Gérard. He's a Frenchman who was struck by lightning. And since then, he discovers that he suddenly has unusual powers. He begins to play with them, develop them, and begins to demonstrate. At which point the scientists, which was primarily in Europe and France, did a deep study in the laboratory under the most strict conditions. What did he do? Of course, he would take a spoon and bend it, touching it, just like that with the finger, twirl it around and bend it into any shape as if it's putty. It would become soft. You could touch it. It's cold. It's not hot. And then he would do that looking at the spoon without even touching it. So they put successively stronger pieces of metal. At some point, the hardest metal that they could build with the best of modern metallurgical science was sealed in a glass tube, placed before him at a distance. He points to the metal, and right there, the metal just bends. What kind of power does it take to bend metal, which is so tough? It would need an entire gigantic machine with press and so many horsepower or kilowatts of energy, and he just points with a finger and pop, the metal melts. Can you recognize the implications of this for the future civilization? Where mind can directly intervene on matter in a way that the best of our current technology is unable to do. Just like that, effortlessly. One of the implications, and in fact this is Unfortunately, we will come to that later. The military implications are the most interesting for the current humanity. So we have in China the record of young children with psychic powers that the government wants to train to prepare them to be able to influence metal at a distance. For what? So that when there is an incoming missile, you can put your mind upon it and soften the metal and get it to fall. You see the implications for the future civilization. I'm still, unfortunately, staying with very material things, but we're going to get to something far more important later. So here's an example where metal itself becomes putty just with the influence of thought. There are many such examples of influence of matter, some involving displacement, moving of objects, sometimes by looking at them. Russia did a series of experiments in the Soviet Union phase when Nelia Mikhailova was one of these psychics. She would sit before the table and various objects of different materials would be placed. She would concentrate, and at some point all the measuring instruments would begin to spike crazily. Brain waves, ECG, breathing, everything would just spike, and at the same time objects on the table began to move. And at the end of that demonstration of 10 or 15 minutes, she could move anything at will. She would be exhausted. But the others were not exhausted. They could move objects, feel nothing. Can mind literally move an object, bend metal, and what else could it do? Can it transmute metal also? And there have been experiences of this, where objects held, concentrated upon, have been shown to have as if atoms which have been transmuted. Or, as Dr. Dean showed here, water infused with a certain consciousness energy can have consequences on biological processes and growth. I'll refer here to a series of experiments which were done in India in the Dabur Research Foundation laboratories, which are some of the most advanced in the world, reputed and following all the standard protocols. They had about 100 healers from all over the world who were brought, who were made to go through these double-blind kind of experiments. I just touch upon a few to show you what is the potential of our consciousness when unleashed in our lives. So one of the things they would do is they would tell the healer, we want a specific outcome in the change in tissue, in vitro or in vivo, depending whether you put it in the petri dish or in the living rats or human beings. We want this specific change. What is that like? So they had about 40 markers that they were tracking in the lab. We want the marker for inflammation to go down. So and they give a technical name for it. The healer says, what's that? What does it do? They describe to him what that marker does. Other than that, the healer knows nothing. He takes these cells, or as they did it, they would infuse it into the water and then dip the cells into the water for the double blind. So there'll be one which is water with healing energy, water without healing energy. They would dip cells in both, watch the results. So the cells which were exposed to the healing energy found that specific marker going down. Or another marker which indicates youth in cells. So they would tell him the technical name. He says, what does it do? How does it work in the cell? You describe to him, he puts his healing energy, and you have the result. The cells become younger. So they accelerate the lab rats' aging using concentrated sugar solutions. Know what that does to your body. And then they expose the lab rat now to the healing energy, and there is a regression of age in the cellular structure, in the cellular working, just by concentration of an energy. Now, while they were doing all these fascinating experiments, I had an occasion to sit with their scientists and listen to them. They were all in shock and awe, but being in India, it was not such a big deal. It's just that it was so easy to do. That's what was the shock and awe for them. And then the most shocking or surprising was one of the healers was based in the United States. He was supposed to fly down for a trial. And he said, I'm sorry, I have work, I cannot come down, but I will do the healing through a Skype call, video call. These scientists said, how can that work? So they put this laptop, in front of it, the water solution, and the healer does his thing through the video call. Now that water solution is taken and it has all the effects, including all these kinds of effects that I spoke of. Consider the implications. What is it that is linking the water here with the healer who is on the other side of the world? In between is an internet transmission. Electrical signals. It's not even a continuous electrical signal. It's being bounced through satellites with radio waves. So there's no physical contact anywhere. And all you have on the screen of the laptop is a picture. And how is this influence coming into the water? At some point, you have to recognize it's not the physical connection, it's the mind connection. The man looking at the picture is as if in his mind consciousness connected to this space physically, isn't it? Dr. Dean Radin has unusual experiments of this kind, quite fascinating for what he has been able to do. One of the things they did was, they said, well, if it can be done like this at a distance, can we do it with a recording? What if you remove the fellow at the other end, you record the video call and now play back the video call and do the same effect? Would it work? And surprisingly, Dr. Radin shows it works. Now ask yourself, that man's mind is no more here because he's gone to sleep. Maybe he's even passed on. And the recording of his consciousness doing his healing is having this effect. Where is that healing energy stored? Where is it coming from? You see why it breaks this model. And it severely breaks it. But yes, those equations would remain, those textbooks would remain as special cases. But now we have to look at reality as something far more wide and fluid and plastic and free. From the spiritual consciousness, from the spiritual perspective, you will recall the mother's words, everything within you, including your biology, including the cellular working, is a habit that can be changed by an action of consciousness. And if this is true of the cells, this model tells you it's true also of the atoms in your body, but also atoms of the objects that you hold and use, and the atoms of the things around you everywhere on earth. The earth itself and the atoms of the earth are influenced by our thought, isn't it? So I give you another example of how this happens through something called the Global Consciousness Project. You'll see in one of the papers which Dr. Dean Radin showed here, it was jointly done with Dr. Roger Nelson from Princeton University. He was the founder of a whole other series of experiments which were pioneering, and one of them still continues under Princeton University called the Global Consciousness Project. The website is noosphere.princeton.edu. One of the, so what they're doing there is the random number generator that he spoke of, which can be influenced by the mind, was set up all across the earth at various locations. The last I had seen, they had 65 random number generators, one of which was in S. Vyasa in Bangalore. Plugged into a computer, it's just putting out pulses. Nobody's concentrating on it. But all these pulses from the 65 sources are collated in one central computer, synchronized to the millisecond or nanosecond, and a statistical analysis done to get the same kind of graph that you saw before. And what you saw was the graph was naturally random because a series of 65 streams of random numbers randomly varying to combine in a randomness. And then suddenly the graph tends to go up and then fall again. So they set up a protocol. They said, we won't try to guess what made it go up. They reversed the thing. They said, we will observe an event and then see if the graph is influenced by the event, which was, from the scientific point of view, a safer thing to do. So then they took up events which had global implications. For example, a natural disaster. So I'll give an example. About 15 years ago, there was a tsunami which took place in the Bay of Bengal, and about 200,000 lives were lost within a few hours. The graph did not go up. An hour down, the graph began to go up. 2 hours down, it went up much more. So it was not the people suffering which was being registered, it was the people watching it on television being distressed which was being registered. Interesting. Or can anybody guess which was the highest time the graph ever went up? It's in the last 25 years that the project has been on. Which event on earth could have? Yes, September 11th, 2001. The graph went up the highest ever and stayed up for 3 full days and then came down. What is interesting, those of you who remember that event, for 3 days there was a kind of a global shock, a state of being stunned and connected with the whole world. You felt that, and that registered in the graph, that sense of connection. But what is even more shocking is the graph began to rise a full 9 hours before the first plane hit the towers. How do you explain that? And for the scientists, even if you say intention, whose intention? There were only a few people who knew what was going to happen. So what was being registered? And the scientists don't have a model to understand that. And that's why I'm coming back to Orville's role, our role. From the knowledge that we have received from Sri Aurobindo, who gives you this very detailed framework and theory of how this works. The only theory which is rational, scientific, and validable and verifiable, testable in the laboratory. Okay, so one of the things, of course, the knowledge also is part of the larger yoga body of knowledge and the larger body of various spiritual traditions of the world. But one of the things we learn from the tradition is, in our own, we have not just physical body, we have subtle layers of the bodies. In our own subtle body, there is already a sense of the incoming future. We all have a certain ability of sensing the future, especially where it involves threat. And that's a built-in protective system. So if something came rapidly close to your eyes, you would blink. Instinctively, you say, yes, because of the nerve signals. No, it's not just that. The subtle body senses it first, the nerve signals follow, and before the thing can even be seen, there's already a nerve signal which has started. And all of this can be verified and laboratory tested. And so, in the collective body of humanity, which was about to face a severe shock a few hours down, in the subtler grade of the human body, I mean human as a species body, there was already a bracing for the shock to come, which was being registered on this graph. Do you see the implications of this? We're even demonstrating that there is a collective consciousness which can sense just as much as an individual's consciousness that can sense. There are two things which I will complete with this part of the discussion. So when the graph starts going up, it's because somewhere within each one of us we sensed a shock to come, except we were not conscious here. Again, it has implications. It means if we could become conscious in our own deeper layers, we could sense the incoming future consciously and act upon it, which is one of the experiments which was shown here, that you can actually sense cards or die which are thrown in advance even. The other implication, which is far more important for us, is that we have a collective consciousness, and therefore in that collective consciousness, there is also a collective evolution. One of the most interesting outcomes of the Global Consciousness Project experiment is, over the last 25 years, the overall sense of the graph has been rising. That means a deeper sense of interconnection between human beings is actually being measured by physical effects of atoms vibrating. And with this, I come to the most important implication of this. Remember, the experiment is actually measuring 65 random number generators, placed randomly somewhere on Earth, right? Why those generators only would be influenced by our state of mind? All atoms would be influenced. We're just measuring 65 randomly. So when we have a certain state of mind, we're influencing not just those measuring instruments, we're measuring all the atoms around us. We're influencing all the atoms around us. And one of the experiments which demonstrates this so dramatically in the Global Consciousness Project is the New Year's Eve experiment, where, remember, on New Year's Eve, people go out and have riotous parties. In the riot, there are 10 seconds of focus. As you count down to New Year, you're looking at the clock and everybody in the room is concentrating and doing a 10, 9, 8, 7. And the moment when you hit midnight, again there's a riot and chaos. If you could measure those 10 seconds, would the Global Consciousness Project show a spike there? And that's the experiment. So what do we find? Yes, in fact, there is a spike. And the spike follows the time zones of the world. Isn't that amazing? As people wake up for those 10 seconds, I mean wake up because the rest of the time we are all zombies living as zombies. So you wake up, half wake up for 10 seconds. There's a spike here. In what? In all the atoms of the physical world, of the earth itself. Now vibrating less randomly because of the state of your mind being aligned and less random. And the wave passes now to the next time zone as you fall into chaos and your atoms fall into chaos. The next time zone hits its 10 seconds peak of consciousness, awake, unified. You see the implications of this from an evolutionary point of view. If all of us right now choose to be aligned to a single idea, aligned in a single aspiration, aligned in a conscious effort, shifting our consciousness, not only all of us as a collective body are lifted, assisted, supported by our individual efforts, but as a whole we rise in the body of humanity. But at the same time, the physical body of Mother Earth, which is the earth, is also shifting in consciousness with us, becoming less random, less chaotic. One of the implications would be less earthquakes, less destruction, less crazy weather, because we have entered in harmony, in consciousness with nature. When we enter in chaos, we drag nature in chaos with us, physical nature, isn't it? So these are some of the most extraordinary implications from studies of such high grade of scientific objective value, but with enormous subjective implications. And one last point then I will make from this part of the discussion is from the Global Consciousness Project, again, the outcome. Which part of the world are you influencing most right now? With your thoughts, with your emotions, with your aspiration, or with your chaos and with your confusion and your anger and your hatred and your bad moods. Which part of the world are you influencing? Yes. This part right now, which you're carrying with you, your body. You see, when you're in a bad mood, you're upset, you're depressed, you say, I've had enough of this, I want to run away. And you run away to some other place. For the first few days, you feel good. I'm away from my problems. After the 3 days, you saw a lot of experiments, they had effect after 3 days. This 3 number is very interesting, or rather 3 days is interesting. So after 3 days in your holiday, what happens? All your bad mood begins to come back to you, isn't it? It's as if your subtle body, your mind body, emotion body that you ran away from eventually caught up with you in about 3 days. And now suddenly sitting where you are, you have your bad mood. Now you need to run away from that and get back to somewhere else. You can't run away from yourself. But it has further implications. The chaos is taking place at the level of atoms. And if your atoms are chaotic, your cellular working is chaotic. If your cellular working is chaotic, your organic working is chaotic. And what is chaos in the biology? We call it ill health, sickness. Isn't it? What is good health? Harmony. Harmony in an organic level, at a cellular level, even at an atomic level. So your state of mind is actually changing your state of health. And the implications when we look at the subtle bodies equally along with the gross physical body now, which now we should, with the evidence we have had, in the part of your consciousness where you become rigid, your subtle body becomes tight, your gross body becomes rigid, your muscles go into a tightness, your bones begin to harden, and the consequences of that illness. Your physical illness is a representation in physical form of the psychological distortion that you have once it has solidified enough. But you can also reverse it. We can choose our state of consciousness. That is entirely our freedom. That freedom of state of consciousness implies a change, a ripple effect all the way down into our most physical part of consciousness. And as we saw from the earlier example of Dabur Research Foundation, even the cellular regeneration and reversal of aging is possible. If it is possible in the petri dish, if it is possible in the rats, it is much more possible in our human consciousness, in our human bodies, which are so much more aware, or can be made so much more aware. Now I'll link it back to the new civilization. I've not touched on so many other phenomena which I would have wanted to cover, but one of the things I'll briefly touch upon, telepathy. If you can sense other people's thoughts, feelings, emotions as clearly as you can see the external form, what would it mean? We would have no secrets from each other, isn't it? What would such a civilization be like? Well, the mother already warned us about it, or rather she told us what it was. She said, as the supramental consciousness grows in its influence on the earth, there will be no more any secrets. You will not be able to hide anything. Everything will get exposed. It's happening in a kind of an indirect way through hacking and other means, but this will be the real outcome of it, that in consciousness we will begin to awaken and sense directly each other's states, as happens when we're in the subtle body and meet in the subtle body in dreams. But we would experience it now in the physical consciousness, in the physical world, in our daily interactions. How would we relate to each other? If you saw somebody had a difference of opinion, you could not blame them anymore, because you would realize everybody has differences of opinion. The only foundation on which we could relate to each other would be a deeper sense of inclusiveness and love, underlying sense of empathy, coming from a deeper soul sense of family, underlying sense of oneness in the soul. This is the fraternity of soul fraternity upon which Aurobindo has to be built, is intended to be built, which would be our first effort. Remember Sri Aurobindo's correction to the French Revolution, which went liberty, equality, fraternity. So they ended up with neither liberty nor equality because fraternity was forgotten. And he said, you begin with fraternity, then you have the liberty to have equality, if you may paraphrase. And if we can begin with this fraternity in the shift of consciousness in our collective, begin to relate to each other all as children of the Divine Mother, the equality and the liberty will follow without any conflict. And we are here to do that. Whatever our current difficulties, this is what we have come for. And with the help, remember the other truth, the great higher consciousness that's waiting, assisting to lift you up. As we open to her, she embraces us, lifts us, and helps us in that transformation. And she transforms, actually. These would be natural implications of these studies. And I'm putting it in the spiritual context. And Auroville, I wish one day will become a center for these consciousness studies, including these kinds of experiments. But because we have here 4 advantages that nobody else can equal, I hope one day here we will have a center for consciousness studies which will be leading in the world. We have 4 advantages. First, we have the theory, which is the most complete, which these scientists do not have. They are pretty much shooting in the blind, trying out their experiments. Second, we have the yoga technology to actually change our consciousness and measure the results of those changes. The means for that, again, are given. And many of us, this is the third advantage, many of us are practitioners. Some more, some less, doesn't matter. But here's the largest body of practitioners. If you want to do an experiment of how consciousness can change people, circumstances, from biology all the way through chemistry, biology, psychology, from physics all the way through, here's the place you can get the largest pool of test subjects. And finally, here's the largest pool of scientists. Because finally, this is one domain where you are the test subject, but you're also the scientist, isn't it? So I'm very keen that this discussion and this summit itself should inspire Auroville to establish a center for consciousness studies, which would be the foremost in the world. Namaste.
Well, what can I say to that? In many ways, I think you have opened a lot of avenues, but in some ways, it's also left me speechless as to how can I integrate. But I love the way you wove in the concept of consciousness and science into matter and how it is possible at the level of cellular, that the power of transformation and change is within us. I loved the fact that Auroville is a place that is committed to that kind of consciousness where we are working with ourselves at our level of our body, and we can be that consciousness and that field where we can bring this transformation of unity and oneness. So I'm also being mindful that while we're taking care of our hunger for knowledge, for wisdom, there is this little thing called stomach which also wants to be taken care of. So we will continue this discussion after a lunch break. We have another video by Dr. Arnaud and 2 delegates, because he brought in this thing about yoga, and that's what we're going to be delving in post-lunch. And so lunch is being served at the same venue where we had the breakfast. One of our efforts is also to bring in soulful food. So the food that is being served today has been, done by our own farm called the Solitude. It's called the Farm to the Table. So please enjoy yourself. Eat as much as the body needs, not the mind, because the food is very tasty. And we come back in an hour's time, if that's okay. It's 1:10. We would be ready to start at 2:15. Thank you so much, and I hope with this we walk ourselves to the dining area. And yes, Shraddhalu is here. Conversations can happen over lunch as well, and feel free to have a lot more conversations while you're having your lunch. Thank you so much.